maybe just for our guests, please let me give a brief introduction to Mafalda Arias, who is, well, an intercultural colleague who's been working in the intercultural field for many years, but also has a lot of business experience, particularly within the mining industry. I think Mafalda and I had a brief conversation the other day, which was really extremely interesting. I know she's got a lot of very interesting perspectives to share with us today. Also, considering she works a lot with cultural integration of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and that she works as you've also been working in business for many, many years. You moved between Canada and Lima, so you're a researcher, business person, consultant, trainer as well. Mafalda, to start off today, can you tell us a little bit about, well, how and why you're in Lima, and also what the situation is currently like in Peru with regard to the current COVID-19 situation?
I've been here I reside in Vancouver. I live in Canada. I have dual citizenship, so I come back and forth between Vancouver and Lima every quarter. And in this particular year, I moved my trip ahead to around the 10th of February. And I had to go back to Canada around the 25th of February for work, be there for 1 week, and then come back to Peru to continue here. And just a couple of weeks before my return to Canada, the president of Peru announced that we were beginning a strict lockdown, effectively March 15. And for a period of 2 weeks. Since those 2 weeks, the lockdown has been extended for another 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So now we are in day, I believe, 63 or 64 of the lockdown. And the lockdown means that all of the airports, internal and external flights, international flights, all of that has been stopped since March 15 at 8 p.m. And there's no mobilization of people, so we have to stay in our homes. All public places, beaches, parks, forests, everything is available. We're not able to go out. If we need to get out, they were starting with 4 or 6 essential industries that were the only ones that could move out, and so that people that work in the medical field, pharmacies and supermarkets, so that we will guarantee food supplies for everybody. And banks also, they remain open. But the rest of the industries were staying at home. And so if you needed to go out to purchase something, either you would go on foot to a supermarket near you, or if you were in care of elderly people, then you can ask for a special permit. The permit had only 48-hour validity, and then some days, for no apparent reason, the permit was valid for 3 days. So every time that I needed to go out to do something, that's the only way. And do something means that I go to the pharmacy for medical supplies for my parents who are elderly, and for food for them, because they're in the category of risk, and so as elderly people, they cannot go out. And social distancing was a norm. It existed. However, as soon as you get into the supermarkets, like the supermarkets in North America or the rest of the world, then you were inside the supermarket and everybody was more or less on their own. So I used my shopping cart as a weapon of social distancing to maneuver the people that were getting close. And the markets are still the number one focus of infectious coronavirus spread. Okay. From a perspective, how the instruction was given to the country was very much hierarchical. Peru is a high hierarchy country, and so it was top down. This is what we do, and it was very compared to other countries or other cultures where people don't need much supervision. We are exactly the opposite. We need micromanagement, and the micromanagement will come in our perspective under COVID with all sorts of different other police, army, or navy in major city intersections, just stopping every single vehicle, asking why you were out in a very peaceful way, and then reminded you to please go immediately back to your home and don't get out.
Considering, I mean, the vastness of the country, and also sort of the difference, you know, I know there's quite a gap also between, you know, the rich and the poor, people living in towns and people living in sort of more rural areas. How was the spread of information, and how was and how did people perceive this sort of micromanagement that you talk about?
For Peruvians, we like to be micromanaged.
Yeah.
So that we feel it's more clear, it's safer when we are micromanaged. We have a way of double checking, this is what you're expecting me to do. In terms of the inequalities, traditionally, pandemics since the bubonic plague have accentuated the inequalities between groups, and that has been absolutely evident in this pandemic with the coronavirus in Peru, and probably for many places in Latin America, but I'm speaking from my experience in Peru. The number one thing that you have to do is wash your hands, and wash your hands regularly. If you are living in a shanty town, you don't have access to water. There's no water. So how could anybody be able to keep that minimum hygiene to avoid spreading? And many people that are working in a hospital that are serving food for the people that are sick, for example, people that work in the hospitals in those functions, some of them are living in shanty towns. So then, yes, when they get into their workplaces, they have a protocol of, you know, sanitation. You know, you get to you put your feet in the word just went away. So they have a protocol of sanitation before they go into the workplace that is absolutely reinforcing that divide. Indigenous populations in the Amazon have been attended, but not to the same degree that people in the capital. Something that I have observed out of COVID-19, for example, when in addition we have a curfew. The curfew started from 6 p.m. in the afternoon until 5 a.m. every day, so you wouldn't be able to move. So the people that are working as attendants in the supermarket will close attention at about 2 in the afternoon, so that people will have from 2 to 6, they will have 4 hours to arrive to the workplace. Public transport has been cut to avoid proximity, and so that means that there are fewer buses available. The people that work in the supermarket may not have the benefit of having their own vehicle. They need to use public transit. Public transit, if I used to see, for example, 50 buses, I would see now 4.
Okay.
So people would have to need the 4 hours to literally walk back to their home.
Wow. Okay.
So that is a huge impact. You see the buses, but you don't see spaces in between the people that are sitting in the bus.
Okay.
So normally, I've heard in Canada, for example, if there's a big sign on one of the seats that says this seat is empty for social distance purposes or something like that, but we don't have that in the bus. So everybody has, you know, the social distance here is 1 meter. You have 1 meter between people, but once you get in the bus, everybody's together. So some inconsistencies like that.
Okay. And from the extent of the situation, you know, is it comparable to other countries in South America? Is it as severe in Peru? What sort of information is available?
It is actually is not looking the best. I was just reading an article today from the Financial Times. I believe the article is a couple of days old, and they were comparing Peru as one of the countries within the region, within South America, that is having the worst impact. The last time that I looked at the numbers, Brazil is leading the number of infections within the region. Obviously, it's a huge country, big territory, larger population, but right immediately on second place is Peru, for example. And so if you look at this in proportion of the population that Brazil has to the proportion that Peru has, it could be close to being on the first place. So it is discouraging, and this has although we were the first, one of the first, if not the first country in Latin America to enforce restrictions and lockdown immediately, over the course of days, that lockdown has not been necessarily respected in the way because of social distance. We're a collective culture, right? We're very specific. So in other, when they say, please make sure that one person per family goes to the grocery shopping, I have seen people in the supermarket that there's two people, husband and wife, or mother and daughter. I say, yes, you go 1 meter apart outside. They measure your temperature. I am wearing N95 mask, gloves, my bag, all of that. But it's still, the social distance is relative. And so, yes, within Latin America still, it's unfortunately not very encouraging.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit about as well the situation with also internet, access to internet, how that's impacting on business? I mean, I know we're concerned about our connection today, so we've also got a pre-recorded version. The sound sometimes is not ideal, I realize, but yeah, could you give us a sort of an idea of the situation?
Yes, absolutely. I think this will become my saying during the pandemic. The internet is a privilege of the North. Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the things that I have struggled the most to try to manage. Last week, it took me 3 hours to send one email with no attachments.
Okay.
So it's sporadic. It's not stable, and for many people here, that's the normal. Only banks and universities have fiber optics connected for their internet, so they have guaranteed access to internet. The rest, businesses have done their own private investment into having fiber optics because this is the 21st century. You need to be connected. But residential, and I'm in a home, that falls on another category. And so everybody that is now working from home, some people are having no problem because some neighborhoods are closer to where the financial or business district is, and so they get the benefit of that proximity. But if you're not in that space, then you have to suffer and struggle. And if the internet is gone, well, just for people here, it's gone. They just do something else, or they communicate via WhatsApp, and that's how they manage. But definitely, internet is a privilege of them.
Considering the specific work that you do and the cultural component to that work, how have you been able to move things online? I mean, if you're, having difficulty sending emails, have you had the possibility to, do online sort of facilitation training, business interactions, or not? And maybe how do you see that developing for you personally?
I have been able to do virtual sessions. What I have observed is when I had a virtual session with 10 people, the quality of the communication was greatly impacted, even though I turned my camera off. When the sessions are smaller, like on a one-on-one, the first thing that I communicate with my client, with the participant of the session is, this is my internet challenge. You see my face, this is who I am, would you mind if I turn my camera off? And I just focus all my energy into acutely listening to what my client or my participant is saying, and that has been perfectly well. But on a separate note, when I look at the way that I have traditionally done intercultural work, it has always been on a personal face-to-face kind of contact, either with one person or with a group. And we take, at least I take multiple signals that give me information about my audience. So you can sense in a room, you have this sort of embodiment of other people's energy. You can sense which corner of the room is having more tension or difficulty. And there's a lot of body language that you can tap into it. Either you observe how they move their hands or their legs or the position of the body, etc. But the one thing that I struggle is if you're working in a group and you're having a Zoom conversation and you're trying to define the social work that we do, I don't have access to anything that is below the neck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the level of interpretation gets diminished by this. And so that's one of my challenges. But maybe that's a personal challenge because I am Canadian and I've been in Canada for a good number of years. For me, I'm still very tactile, very very body oriented, very contact. That's not a personal challenge, but I'm struggling as to how can I see other things that are not messages given here.
Okay.
If I'm talking with emotional restraint cultures, maybe this is enough.
Yeah.
But if it's not a emotional restraint culture, how do I explain my Zoom?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very true. It's how do we identify, how people are reacting via the normal micro behaviors that we otherwise see in terms of hand movements, foot movements generally. It's much more difficult to detect when we only have a certain, one aspect, one view of people. Do you think because of this situation that it maybe at least helps us improve our listening to a certain extent, that we somehow also maybe, unconsciously are developing better listening skills, enhancing deep listening?
I think you have hit into something, Edna, because what I have observed is the sessions that I've had on a one-on-one basis with my clients, the ones that I have turned off the camera off to have a better audio quality, that has been incredible, immense benefit, to the point that my client was saying, this conversation has felt exactly if I would be having a coffee across from you. That's how the connectivity has been. So I think that is one of the best strategies towards that limitation. At least in my case, it has helped me immensely. But how do I do that with a group of 40? The only thing that I can think of is, your ground rules at the beginning. If you want to say something, please say your name out loud. Not to put it in the chat, but give them authority to speak up and unmute everybody, but be respectful. If you want to say something, unmute yourself and go ahead and say it. And then keep track of the turns so that I follow the order of the participants.
Okay. Do you, in addition to this sort of aspect of working online rather than, in a face-to-face context, what other specific challenges would you identify for your work? Or what other issues do you think are important, increasingly important, considering the current situation?
I think I go back to one piece of work that I did, and it was looking at expanding the existing definition of culture to include other perspectives. And I think
Sorry, Mafalda, I didn't hear the beginning. Could you try could you just repeat that again?
Is it better now when it's closer?
Wow, it's completely different. Fantastic. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so what I think I would like to take a look at a piece of work that I did, and it's quite even more relevant now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. When we traditionally think about safety, and we look at how we take care of ourselves or our businesses, etc., through the history of safety, and this is coming from since the Code of Hammurabi, the safety was about, on a commercial side, on a business side, first to protect your cargo, so that the spices that you were sending from here and then, so what were the consequences if that would happen? The safety of the products. With the Industrial Revolution, the sense of safety got expanded to the safety of the women and children, because they were being impacted by working in textile factories in the UK, and the human rights violations towards children and women working under those conditions. And then later, it was expanded toward the safety of your co-workers, generally speaking, not only the vulnerable populations, but all of them. and expanded to, at least in Canada, to consider negligence if out of the negligence of the company there was an accident that caused death to the people that were working within the same organization, within the organization. So, but what I see here now with COVID, the sense of safety is not only about you, your workers, but it also become about your neighbors or the persons that you are in contact with for the work that you're doing. And so an expansion of that definition to include the perspective of the other, so that we take care of each other, not only ourselves, but where our safety stops, the safety of the rest can include, and our safety can cross the line into the safety of other people. And that's exactly the same thing that we're looking right now with COVID. I can be okay, or I can be infected, but if I don't take care of me, I'm going to infect other people, and vice versa. So I think that's where I see the next concept or idea going through, and then how we as interculturalists are able to help navigate how do we do that, so that is not an imposition on any of the parts, but it's a collaboration for mutual caretaking of each other, if you want to put it that way.
So do you see it then as leading to a sort of a stronger sense of also solidarity, maybe strengthening of networks? How do you see it sort of in a practical sense impacting society?
I don't have a precise answer, but I think it is a definition that needs to be co-creating between all the parties involved. It has to be an item that is on the agenda like anything else. So how do we deal when this happens? You know, I'm not sure if that is, you can see it as solidarity. It depends on what angle you bring to your life. If it's the Red Cross, maybe it's under the solidarity part. If it's under corporate sense, it goes beyond responsibility, right? It comes into a sense of exclusion of the other one.
Okay, so going beyond the sense of corporate social responsibility, but more toward or sort of an increased emphasis on this idea of the third mission of companies.
Yes, and I wouldn't. It's a sense of a different way of social practices. I wouldn't even look at it just from a corporate social responsibility. This is onerous on all of us, regardless of who you are as an organization or as a non-for-profit. So I think I see a new way of social performance or social interactivity as social connection, but that considers the input of the other. Like if I put it in the sense of COVID-19 and me going to the supermarket, when I sensed that somebody was coming close to me, I would first speak to the person, would you please move further? Because if everybody's wearing masks, sometimes people don't hear you, so you speak louder. And if none of that, then, you know, my most aggressive one, I move my cart in front of them and I says, you know, stay there, please.
Stay there.
So, but it's a mutual agreement. And so the person will click into, oh, yes, I'm sorry, you know, because we're going back to our automatic pilot of how we are socially interacting with somebody. And so, but it's a constant co-creation of what social distance means to me. And we know what 1 meter is, but how you interpret 1 meter changes completely. And that comes from a cultural construct, right? We have created, for me, 1 meter is exactly 100 centimeters. But by somebody else, that 1 meter could be 30. And so it's constantly co-creating of this sense, what is safety for you and for me, and let's agree that this is going to be the distance. So I think that's where I see it going in terms of integrating the other, because it's like this intercultural, we're navigating the cultural differences and the similarities in a context like this, where health is affecting absolutely everybody. This is how I see it being inserted.
So it's actually then almost automatically developing these sort of mutual, coordination of space and, a sense of appropriacy. That's happening not because of, essentially happening because of the external impact of COVID-19. Maybe just, I know you're going to add a point just before I let you hop in. Let me just ask the people who have joined us if they have any questions. Please can also unmute, or participants, and they can ask. Sorry, Mafalda, I know you wanted to add something.
That's I'm looking forward to the conversation. Yes.
Oh, okay. So let me just see. I'll just add the possibility for anybody to jump in. I mean, the very interesting thing in having you join us as well is that, currently we've spoken to a lot of people from the European, context. We had Shannon Murphy Robinson joining us from the US, but you're our first guest who's, based in South America, and you have a very interesting and different also experience of things there. Matthew, I think, has unmuted himself, and also Vincent. Please go ahead, maybe Matthew first and then Vincent.
Okay, no, great conversation. I loved it. Can you hear me, by the way? You can hear me?
Perfect, yeah.
Now that sort of community, co-creation. So I'm thinking about the same thing here as well. Sort of peer-to-peer accountability, is that going to come into it? I'll chuck a few things out. Sort of the creation of a new contract, a new community contract, and we're having a debate here. I mean, traditionally it might have been the elders telling the youngers. So how does that start? What are you seeing? What are you thinking about how that might morph into something real?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very interesting question, and when I am processing things, I don't look at you in the eye. I'm going somewhere. So if my eyes are going elsewhere, know why. I think, in terms of if the elders are going to be the one dictating or traditionally continuing to imparting the knowledge, I think now more than ever, there's a need for the work that we need to do, because that gap will remain, and is how we make that connection between the elders with the new generation that the success will be given. So I think that will be, and I see that, for example, if we as siblings want to have a Zoom call with my mother, one of us needs to be there to help my mother do the Zoom thing, or whatever is the technology. And so when it comes to that co-creation, it's the how that interculturalists provide to that co-creation that will allow to shorten that gap. Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't know if that answered to what you were saying, Matthew, or what you were asking.
I was also thinking in terms of the community. We have a little incident locally, and I was just going to go out and have a totally reasonable, because that's my middle name, conversation with these characters. My mother, a survivor of Brexit, was saying, "Oh God, don't do that." So I'm middle-aged, they're young. There would be a perception of sort of parent-child, and so she was positing that it wasn't possible to have a sort of peer-to-peer equal status dialogue. The perception on their side, older people, what do they know? And it would lead to an escalation. So just wondering about the dynamics of sort of power and age of it and experience. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts in terms of just what is going to happen, say, in the community, in the broader community?
But I think in a situation like that, this is what the first thing that comes to mind is, it's like any diffusion of any innovation. You're coming with the idea to bridge the gap with them. So from the group of the teenagers or the younger generation that had an opinion about it, do you have close proximity to any of them? Because obviously you are an outsider. You don't belong to the group. But the fact that you are an outsider to the group, that doesn't make you an outsider of the bigger context of what Britain is in the subject that you are discussing. So from the group of all those insiders of that age group, is there anybody that you might have closer proximity to? that you can start establishing a relationship to really understand it from their point of view, not from your own generation. And then as a consequence of that rapport, through that connection, start, seeing the other influence. Because if it starts like, okay, let's have a conversation right now, that build that hasn't been made up. So obviously there's resistance to whatever you bring, even if your idea might be the most suitable for the situation.
Yeah.
So
it's almost a project plan, isn't it? Find out the resources you have, find out the key players you have, and build it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but Matthew, I think it's a very interesting point, because this question of, this peer-to-peer interaction or community interaction, I've heard a number of people locally here talking about, how sort of the kids, their kids are sort of more aware of distance, more strict as to, what behaviours are currently considered appropriate, and that that they're almost sort of reprimanding or reminding the older generation what's appropriate and what's not, because they're really being sort of also in now that schools are up and running, they're being more and more conditioned into particular practices. So it's really an interesting dynamic that's developing when you think about this concern for self, concern for other, and how that's negotiated in the community.
No, exactly. Reverse intervention.
I think that's very interesting. Something that I think we'll find a lot more discussion on. Mm-hmm.
And generationally, I see it differently here. The people that want to continue socially get together with less social distance are the young people, because they don't want to stop the party.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't care. So it's good to hear a different perspective. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Vincent, would you like to ask a question or add a comment, please?
I had a question. Thank you, Mafalda, for joining us. I'm not sure, I couldn't hear you very well at the beginning, but you said you partly spending your time partly in Canada, partly in Peru. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then looking at the abstract that was published before this interview, you said you don't have any coping strategy particularly. I'd still be interested to see whether you have one particularly for Peru or particularly for Canada. Coping, of course, with the COVID, but also in general. Interested to see what is your approach dealing with the one country or the other.
Okay, let me see if I heard you correctly, because the connection sometimes breaks. You were curious as to what are the differences that I have noticed in between Canada and Peru?
Your coping strategy yourself, when you are in Canada or when you are in Peru?
Mm-hmm.
I've only been in Peru during COVID. I have not had a chance to be in Canada during COVID. But one of the things that I have noticed based on interactions and comments with my Canadian colleagues and friends is if I would have been in Canada, I would have been probably allowed to go out to the park, to the seawall, to be in nature, to do those kind of things. I would still have that freedom, and I will have social distance within the forest, and etc. But I would be living by myself in my apartment in a more smaller place. What I see in contrast here for being in Peru, yes, I'm not able to go out to the beach, for example, but I am very well in my collective culture, sharing a home with my mother, with other family members. And so it's bringing me that collective culture comfort to managing the stresses or the challenges that we have. Perhaps that would have been a challenge for me, although I've been used to living by my own, alone for 15 years, if not more. So I don't know if that may not have changed, although I doubt it, that the impact would be different, because one thing is to choose to live by yourself, and another one is to know that I cannot socialize with my friends, because the difference is the freedom to do so or not. So that's the number one thing that comes to mind. In the other interesting thing that I've discovered in terms of one different coping strategy that I've had to use here was when I was at the highest frustration of internet connectivity. It was the first time that yes, my parents have a really nice big garden. Going to the garden and being in nature in a garden, which is different than being in a forest, it was giving me some level of, peace and calmness. But after 3 hours of being impossible to be sending an email to respond to a client, a very simple thing, I was ready to explode. So the only thing that I came to mind is I start pulling the weeds out of the garden.
Okay.
Weed therapy.
And out of the exercise, what I discovered that was incredibly soothing, it was to put my hands in the dirt and to get all the dirt in my arms and to touch the planet. Oh, for heaven's sakes, So that was the only different coping strategy that I've never tried before. And that's something that I cannot do in Canada because I live in an apartment. So I'm only able to do that with one of my planters, my two planters that I have, which are small. So I don't know if that would have been as soothing as getting really dirt in the garden here.
So you have clearly different parameters: nature versus concrete jungle, collective group orientation versus more individualism in Canada. Clearly, I think you can score on all the parameters with differences. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you for joining us as well, and for your question at the end. I think that's really nice. It gives us this sort of these two very different perspectives on what coping strategies you might use depending on where you are. It's 6:38, so we've run over time. So all I have left to do, time always flies, is to say thank you very much, Mafalda. It was wonderful to have you. I know that you're also writing about the situation in your blog. You're going to keep us posted. We'll share also some of your links on SIETAR Austria and see how the situation develops, and hopefully we can continue this conversation by other means over the next couple of weeks and months. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edna. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Have a lovely day, have a lovely evening, depending on where you are. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.